Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's event celebrating the 32nd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, highlighting South Asian narratives. My name is Neha Dewan, and I'm honored to serve as the National Director of South Asians for America, a national grassroots organization that is dedicated to the advocacy, education, engagement, and mobilization of the South Asian community in the US at the local, state, and federal levels. 32 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA, which prohibits discriminations against individuals with disabilities, was signed into law. The ADA essentially defines a person with a disability as somebody who has a physical or mental impairment that limits one or more major life activities, has a record of such impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. And the important thing to remember is that disabilities can be both apparent and non-apparent. Many disabilities, such as mental health challenges,
Recording in progress,
ADHD, some physical illnesses such as fibromyalgia, neurodiversity, deafness, and many other disabilities are not apparent. July is Disability Pride Month, where we take the space and the time to address the bias and misconceptions in our communities against those with disabilities, and to celebrate disability and the diversity that it brings to our communities. And this issue is especially close to my heart as the mother of a beautiful neurodiverse 3-year-old daughter, Mila. So I just want to share a little bit with you about, my own journey as a caretaker of a neurodiverse child. The challenges that I faced and witnessed in the community, and truly, what I believe what can be done for those in the community. So my daughter was diagnosed with autism in January of 2021, and my goodness, I thought, my world was over. I was, confused, sad, scared. I just didn't know what to expect. And I think, like many others, I mean, this was a world that was completely new to me. And I have found in the 17 months since that this is actually a beautiful community. It's a very accepting and welcoming community. And there really is and was nothing for me to be afraid of. I mean, she doesn't have a terminal illness. She just thinks differently. And in the world, everybody's very different in many different ways. And her having the way that she thinks, it makes her a little bit different is doesn't make it wrong. She's just as wonderful as any other neurotypical 3-year-old that's out there. But anyways, so at 17 months ago, this was a completely different world. And what I started to do was literally read everything I could and talk to parents, as many parents as I could. And actually, you'll be hearing from Dr. Dhruti Contractor this evening. She was one of the first people that I spoke to. And she gave me, words of wisdom, talked about her journey, and really, kind of calmed me down in the same way that, look, there really is nothing to be afraid of here. It's just, we need to find the resources to help our children, and we need to make, the world aware of this. So there's no biases, and our children don't have to face additional challenges that are not, that don't necessarily need to be there for them. So for me as a caretaker, once I started to learn that, I started to, join others in the community, forum groups, groups on Facebook, speaking to other parents. And, it's amazing. You could be in any part of the world, but you automatically feel like you're a sister or brother out there because your experiences are the same and you're bound by the same feelings and, the fear that you may have or the frustration. And how you celebrate the smallest of milestones that your children have that, other people may, take for granted. And I found that to be so beautiful in focusing on, every task that she accomplished that, it is such a big factor to me, and it gives me so much joy. I have made many friends in the community, and we just kind of get each other. and they've pointed me to a lot of resources. And in turn, I've had a pleasure of doing that for other parents as well, saying, okay, well, you know what, I've learned this in speech therapy, or this didn't work, or, you know, maybe you should try this, or how about this game, or something like that. And one of the genesis for events such as this is so that we can share that with other parents out there in the entire disability space. I mean, my journey happens to be the autism journey, but of course the disability space is so vast and wide. You know, my other experience as a caretaker has been, people who are not aware about what autism is. I think that, you know, is a big challenge. There's a certain stigma that's associated with it. And there's also a certain perception that people have of what autism is. So when I tell people that my daughter has autism, the first thing that they'll say to me inevitably is, well, she doesn't look autistic. Well, autism doesn't have a look. It's a spectrum, which is why it's called the autism spectrum disorder. And I think it's not because people are trying to be mean. I think it's just a lack of awareness. They have a certain prototype, or that's just been what's out there, and the lack of awareness. And so I think it's very important for all of us, whether we have neurodiverse children or neurotypical children or family members or what have you, to be able to raise that awareness so that people know that, you know, at least in the autism space, that it's a spectrum. And certainly disabilities, you know, are not all just physical disabilities that are apparent, as I mentioned earlier. The other thing that one of the challenges that I faced as a caretaker is, you know, there's no book on parent. Well, I guess there are books on parenting, but there's really no one size fits all navigation. In this space, there really isn't. I think that, you know, I found that a lot of us have just kind of fumbled through the way, either read our way into figuring out, okay, well, we need an IEP, or we need to go to these meetings, or we need these resources, or speaking to other parents. And I think that is very challenging, especially when you're first given a diagnosis and you need to figure out everything that you need to do for a child. So what would be very helpful is to be able to, you know, have those advocates as we do here, but really just have it be more mainstream and accessible to people, and not just to people with resources. That's another thing that I've learned, is that in this space, sometimes, unfortunately, because resources are so limited, you know, in the neurodiverse world, it's folks with resources who end up with the resources because they have the resources to figure out how to get resources, as opposed to, you know, I remember I was at an Easter egg hunt in April of this year, and I, you know, ran into a single mom who also had a daughter with autism, and she couldn't send her daughter to a toddler development group during the day because then she couldn't get her to daycare, and she couldn't make arrangements because she had to work a certain schedule, and it just couldn't work. So her daughter wasn't able to get the services that she was mandated because this mom had to work. And I think that if we made resources available for parents with neurodiverse children who require certain services, so that they can get those services, you know, that's exactly what we need to be doing. But unfortunately, we don't have that. You know, one of the things that I experienced, that the words that sting to me to this day, last year, my daughter wasn't even 2. She was at, you know, on a playground just playing, and a slightly older child, she may have been 7 or 8, came up and, you know, wanted to play with her. And my daughter was just not engaging in the way that, you know, she probably should have at that age. But again, she was only 2. And what this girl said to me was, and she was nice, she was really, really trying to engage with my daughter. She's very motherly, very nurturing. And then she turned to me and she says, "What's wrong with her?" And I think that just, you know, cut so deep for me. I mean, she obviously didn't mean it in a bad way, but just that, what's wrong with her? And I'm thinking to myself, there's nothing wrong with her. She's just wants to be by herself. She just wants to play and engage, but not with anybody else. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that child did not know that that's also an acceptable form of playing. And there are people out there who prefer to just be by themselves and not engage with other people, or engage in a certain way with other people. And I think that's the critical part, is that we really, really have to teach our children and spread that awareness that it's perfectly acceptable for somebody to just be the way that they are, just because it may not be mainstream or what society expects it to be mainstream, or how society expects somebody to act, does not make it wrong or have something wrong with them. And, you know, the sad thing is that a lot of these children then, you know, become adults, they grow up becoming adults, perpetually thinking that something is wrong with them because they're either left behind on the playground or in school they're not, if they're not communicating a certain way, they're not taken seriously either by the teachers or they don't have friends, and it just becomes a lifetime of difficulties for our children in our community. And one other thing about our community I want to say is that I've been asked, even by family members, hey, is it okay if I tell so and so that she has autism? And I'm just thinking, like, why is that even a question? Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell anybody and everybody that, she has autism so that people can see that this is also somebody who presents on the spectrum. I want people to know. I mean, I'm not ashamed of it. She shouldn't grow up feeling ashamed of it at all. And that's exactly how I'm going to raise her. And the more that we talk about it, we destigmatize, some of these disabilities. And again, I'm speaking just personally from the autism space, but really all of these disabilities, both apparent and non-apparent, we destigmatize it and then give the space for these individuals to grow and be like every other neurotypical individual that's out there. Really, I mean, it's about just sharing what all of this looks like and acceptance. And I'll tell you something, after having heard that girl say what's wrong with her, and not that this would not have been my parenting, but I think that I'm very acutely aware of this now. I will teach my children, I have a newborn, I have two daughters now, that they should always be going up to the child, in the lunchroom who has nobody sitting around them, bringing that child into play who nobody else wants to play with, picking the child who usually gets picked last to be part of their team, have that person go first, celebrating milestones with people, so that you can make folks feel special. I mean, I've talked to so many parents whose children were not invited to birthday parties. And when they had a birthday party, they didn't even know people were going to come. I mean, that's just sad. And no child should ever have to experience that. So, I think this journey has been beautiful. I have to say, I have learned things that I probably never would have. I've seen my daughter grow in ways that I would never have celebrated before. What I would ask from everybody is that, tonight, as you listen to other people's journeys and then the spaces that they have created, and especially in our community where, mental health, disability, just really not necessarily being in the typical space is looked down upon or stigmatized, to really talk about it so that we create a space for other people who don't even realize that there's a space that exists, but also create awareness so that these differences are not looked down upon, that they're actually celebrated and they're accepted. And so, there aren't kids out there who are going up to mothers on playgrounds and saying, hey, what's wrong with your kid? It's like, hey, okay, she wants to be alone. That's fine. I'll come back. Or taking her hand and playing with her in a way that speaks to her. Something of that. And really in the advocacy space, what I would truly advocate for is that there's not enough resources. And I think that goes for a lot of other spaces too, but certainly in the disability space, there's not enough resources for our children and our brothers and sisters. And also awareness of what the resources are. And then even when you have the resources, for instance, I've had therapists who have just canceled or quit, and there's just no accountability. And then with children who, suffer from transitioning to begin with, that's a big blow. You have to start all over, or, you miss out on therapies and things like that. There really needs to be a system that's not so broken. So resources for everybody and accountability for those resources as well. So I'll pause there. I've said a lot, and I could definitely talk a lot about this because, like I said, it's very personal to me, but I would love to turn it over to our moderator for this evening tonight, Adnan Bukhari, who is the chair of the Strategic Partnerships Committee, and he also serves as the Executive Vice President and CFO for National Community Reinvestment Coalition. Turn it over to you, Adnan.
Thank you so much, Neha. Thank you for sharing that personal story. Thank you for opening up our hearts, our minds, and really for calling the whole community to galvanize, to make us more inclusive, to make us more equitable. So really appreciate your leadership. Hi, everyone. I am honored to serve as the National Partnerships Chair of SAFA. and to be your moderator for today's panel as discussion uplifting South Asian narratives in the disability, justice, empowerment, and pride space. Today, we are joined by an incredible panel of inspiring leaders and advocates. We are joined by autism awareness advocate Sham and Dr. Druti Contractor, Fairfax County Public School Board Chair and Disability Justice Advocate Rachna Sizemore Heiser, Disability Justice Advocate and Desi and Diseased podcast producer Afshin Bimani, Healthcare Executive Operations Director, podcast host and trainer Janie Rad, and co-founders of WhatsApp Collegiate, a global network of collegiate disability rights advocates, Manushri Desai and Anusha Singh. Welcome. Our ASL interpreter for today's event, Sarika Mehta, was unable to join due to unforeseen circumstances. We thank her for her leadership on behalf of the hearing impaired, and this reiterates the need for more South Asian ASL interpreters who can provide culturally representative services. So I want to first begin by introducing Sham Contractor, an amazing 10-year-old advocate who has used his YouTube channel, An Ordinary Guy with Autism, to advance his mission to promote autism understanding. Sham is joined by his mother, Dr. Druti Contractor, an orthopedic surgeon based in Georgia, who was a former major in the US Army, who is a passionate advocate for autism understanding and her son Sham's efforts in this space. Welcome, Sham and Dr. Druti. Sham, let's start with you. Why is it important to you to help others understand people with autism, and how do you feel doing the videos?
I feel like I think it's important to me to spread knowledge about people like me. It helps others understand that everyone is same at heart. We are different in real life, but at our core we are all the same. There are also things that make us different, which is the way we think. The things we like in every single person is a different mind, but not a different heart. Even though some autistic kids do different things than neurotypical kids, they still want happiness. They just enjoy their happiness different. There's no such thing as a complete different. We are all human. I picked the title. Oh, sorry.
Keep going, Sham. Tell us more. Keep going.
I picked the title of Ordinary Guy with Autism because we are all the same on the inside. I'm solving the world's riddle about autistic kids.
That's
We
amazing.
create friends with neurotypicals if we understand each other.
Sham, you are my hero. You're an inspiration. I'm going to ask your mom a question. Dr. Druti, can you talk about your experience both as a parent as well as a physician in this journey, which might be helpful for others who are especially caregivers?
Definitely. And it's, the key word is journey. It's a process. Every day it changes. And the main thing is first take deep breaths. It gets better. And that's what I've been told by other advocates. And it's held true with Sham. Sham's understands how others affect him and how the world affects him. And he's wanting a desire to participate in his own way and working hard for others. So my role as a physician as a mother has both played a part in different ways. So as a physician, I've been able to open doors and work through things with insurances and therapies that's easier for me since I can navigate the system. but anyone can use their own primary care physician as their advocate. Our primary care physician was amazing, and the administrative burden is very high, as Neha mentioned before, and the resources are not there. But there's resources that the doctor would know about, state and local agencies, and something as simple as changing a diagnosis code can make all the difference. And I've spent countless hours with insurance companies on hold, but it works. So you just have to have patience. Also, I see things as a problem with treatment goals. So you need to have evaluations about your child. We had many, many evaluations, right, Sham, throughout the years?
Yeah.
And
Medicine.
medicines, yes. And the end goal is always the same, is how to get your child to be a functional human being. That's our goal, with or without us. And the way you get there is based on your child's needs, and you rely on your child's strengths and then work on the deficiencies. And load the boat when you need help. So you're not alone. And as Neha said, there's Facebook groups that can go over therapists, things like that. And if one intervention does not work, do not be afraid. If one therapist doesn't work, one doctor doesn't work, change without hesitation. But as a mother, my experience taught me other things. Many times, I think Neha mentioned, you feel helpless, hopeless, you blame yourself that no improvements are happening. At that time, you really need to forgive yourself that this is not easy. It's hard. Autism both affects, right, physical and mental health. And at that time, you need to trust yourself, and that if do one intervention at a time, one little thing at a time, once a week. Therapists tell us what? Many different things every week to try. Just try once a week. And you don't compare to other children. That's the hardest thing. Celebrate the positives of your child. Get on the same page, especially with your partner, with whatever partner you have. And if you don't have a partner, whatever your team is, your doctor, your therapist, you must get on the same team, the same page. And you are the captain. You are the captain of the ship. And I relied on the Facebook groups and the parents of the schools that we went to. And you need to take care of your own mental health. The toll is absolutely real. You've got to listen to your body. And if you sink, there's someone depending on you. And so you've got to take care of yourself. And the hardest thing is to make decisions about this child right next to you, which therapy to pay for, what intervention to do, what school to go to. But the best thing, I've had regrets making the wrong decision, but all you can tell yourself is you made that decision with the best knowledge you had at that time. And then you'll get love like you'll never, ever know.
That is amazing. Thank you so much, Sham. You are remarkable. Dr. Druti, you're remarkable. Thank you so much for your inspiring advocacy to promote greater understanding of autism. Next, I am honored to introduce Rachna Sizemore-Heiser, who is a college professor, lawyer, disability justice advocate, who is the first Asian American elected to the Fairfax County School Board, my county, and who currently serves as chair of the board. Rachna previously served on the school board advisory committee for students with disabilities and is the 2019 winner of Fairfax County's Martha Glenman Disability Inclusion and Equality Award for helping launch Fairfax County's inaugural Disability Inclusion Summit. Welcome, Rachna.
Thank you. Thank you. And Sham, I don't know how to follow that because your words, what you said, were so wise and inspiring, especially when you said we are all human. I use that all the time because the reality is at the core, we are all human. And that's the most important thing. And whatever our lived norms are, right? However I experience the world or you experience the world are all part of humanity. So I just wanted to say thank you for those words. And Neha, I mean, I'm a fellow autism mom as well. And so your words really spoke to me. And thank you, Adnan, for those kind words. You know, it's interesting to hear, you know, Dr. Druti and Neha, you all starting kind of in the early parts of your journey. I also am a parent of a child, actually young man now with autism. He is 20 years old, and he was also diagnosed when he was 2.5. And like many of us who are in this disability justice space, we started because of ourselves or because of a family member. And that is how I started. I didn't know anything about autism. I didn't know what it was, right? You know, when we started, and I echo everything you said, but I just wanted to add a couple things. First, you have to trust yourself. When my son was diagnosed, and this was from a doctor here in Children's Hospital in DC. So he was 2.5, and she looked me in the eye and she told me, your son is very low functioning, which was a phrase that people used back then. It's very low functioning. There's no therapy. There's no cure, quote unquote. That's what people talked about back when he was diagnosed 20 years ago. There's really nothing you can do, is what she told me. You might want to consider putting him in an institution. And that's what I was told about my 2.5-year-old son. And for me, that was like waving a red flag in front of my face. Like, you know, and that's the reality, is I think we still do that too much to our students and our children, right? I think we say, oh, look, this person has this deficit, that we then put a life sentence on them, right? And that is what that doctor did to my kid. And I said, no. But, you know, back then insurance didn't cover any therapies for autism. Autism Speaks didn't even exist, right? ABA was just getting to be known. Many of the therapies that are there now are there now, were not there then. But what I learned over the years is that you rely on parents. There were already some parents ahead of me in this journey, as you said, and I reached out to them, and I found what worked, and I trusted my gut. And you know, my son now is 20 years old. It took him a couple years longer to graduate from high school, but he's a high school graduate. And he has since developed an incredible talent for music, and I don't say that lightly. And so he will be a freshman at Berklee College of Music in the fall. So I share this only to say to parents who are new on this journey, you need to trust your gut, and everybody has their strengths. Everybody has a talent. Everybody has something they bring to this world, right? And our job as parents and our job as a society is to find what that thing is, make a space for it, and how that person brings it to the world, because it makes all of our world better. Right. And that's, you know, what I learned from him. He had many barriers. That was just the first barrier, right? The doctor who diagnosed him, you know, when he started school, I was told he was sent to a school outside of his community, because that's the one that had the autism program at the time. And when I said, look, you're sending him out of his community, when he goes to middle and high school, he's going to have to go back to his base school where he won't know anybody but these 5 kids in his autism class. That's hard enough for any kid, right? But you take a kid with autism, and that's can you please find a program in his community, at least that feeds to his middle school? And they said, well, we don't have any. We didn't start one. You know, those kids aren't social anyway, so it's not important, right? And when he started developing a passion for being on stage, right, people wouldn't let him be on stage because they were afraid of their perceptions of what autism is. They were afraid he would freak out in front of a crowd. They were afraid he wouldn't handle it, right? And instead of giving him a chance, right, they put all their presumptions and their fears. And I think that's what we do too much, even in our community, right? When my son was diagnosed, I remember several of my uncles and aunties would say, would sort of talk around it, right? His troubles, his issues, his problems, right? And I'm like, no, it's just him, right? His autism is just who he is. It's not a bad or a good or a trouble or a problem. It doesn't mean he doesn't need supports, or he doesn't need therapies, or he doesn't need things just in the same way that others might, right? It's called education, right? Like, and we customize education for ourselves and our students. And so why wouldn't we customize education for what our students with autism need? And so I do think that it's important to share stories of success, because I think it changed mindsets. And so as he grew, when he discovered his musical talent, and I will share, you know, the rest of the world kept trying to tell him all the things he couldn't do. Right. You can't talk. He didn't speak till he's late. He still reads at a very young level. He has apraxia. He sings for 2 hours, but it's difficult for him to speak for multiple sentences. And he actually would be here tonight, but he is the pit guitarist for a local summer theater program. So it's opening night tonight. So he's playing guitar. but so when they would meet him and he can't talk well, they would judge him based all on that. And then he would get up on stage and he'd rip a Jimi Hendrix solo, and they would look like, how is this the same person? But we have to listen to our kids, because early on when he was 3 years old and he had just been diagnosed at 2.5, and I was scared and I didn't know what to do, and everybody was telling me, put this kid in an institution, put him away, he has too many troubles. He was showing me, right? He had a toy keyboard and he was playing nursery rhymes on that toy keyboard at 3 because he has perfect pitch and it's memory for music. And I looked at him like, that's a neat trick. Right. And then when he was 7 and he was at a friend's house and picked up a guitar and wouldn't put it down. And 3 days later, after watching YouTube concerts, he was playing John Mayer and Matt Nathanson songs. And I'm like, well, that's a cool trick. Right. Because I wasn't listening to my kid. And so, I tell parents, listen to your kids. They will show you. Right. They know who they are. That's all they've ever known. So listen to them. Right. And so as he got older, and I realized that we in our school system, when you have a deficit, especially a strong deficit, that's what we see, right? We see all the things you can't do, all the places you need help, all the supports you need. We don't provide a path for your strengths, right? And I could talk for hours about the experiences, but that's why I did this job, right? Because I think that we do that to too many kids, right? And I think we do that in the workplace. We put all these narrow stringents on, this is how you're supposed to work, and this is how you're supposed to interview, right? So I started doing trainings. I have an HR employment law background from my law days, and I started doing trainings for organizations on neurodiversity almost 10 years ago in 2013 and 2014, right? And workplace accommodations. And I learned very quickly, like, you can't even talk about accommodations for the non-apparent disabilities without backing up and saying, hey, hang on a second, this is all normal. Like, just because you've defined it as abnormal doesn't mean it's not normal, right? And that's just because you've said, this isn't within my norm, you need to expand your lived norms and your normal. People with disabilities don't have to just always adjust to your world. We have to adjust our world. And I realized the best place to start that is in our schools.
Such an important piece on making sure that those stories of success, what is working, gets amplified, and really talking about we need systems change. We need to think differently. Could I ask you to just very briefly? Clearly, you have a vision. You have a vision for what a future could hold. Would you mind just sharing maybe a snippet of that vision with all of us of what this civil rights model of disability could look like, and what does that mean? How do we get there?
Yeah, and I'll very briefly, because as you can see, could talk about this for hours, but really what we do is we look at disability from what's called the medical model, which is we have to support, we have to accommodate, we have to help, fix, quote unquote, through, but the civil rights model is disability is diversity, right? And until all of our diversity, like when we think about diversity and our diversity initiatives, whether it's in school and at the workplace, it's all about strengths and bringing people in, and diversity brings strengths and creativity. And until we look at disability, until we realize, when we look at diversity, we think our diverse populations have civil rights, right? The civil rights movement was all about that. Well, until we apply that same mindset to people with disabilities, that we have a civil right, that how we live and experience the world, we have a right to do that without people putting barriers. The famous quote, and I'll stop there because I could talk forever, is that people with disabilities are more disabled by the society they live in than the condition of their disability. And that's the civil rights. Until our civil rights of our society makes space for the lived norms of disabilities, people with disabilities will not have achieved their civil rights.
Thank you so much. I could be sitting here all night just listening to you. Really, really appreciate you. Thanks for your inspiring words, your vision, your leadership. So I'm going to go next to our honor, and I'm honored to introduce Afshin Bimani, a disability justice advocate who started the website and Instagram account Desi and diseased. To give people space to talk about what it's like to be chronically ill and South Asian American. Through the website, as well as through her blog and podcast, Afshin discusses her journey living with rheumatoid arthritis, beta thalassemia, and fibromyalgia, the internalized ableism in South Asian communities, and the stigma surrounding her decision to share her story candidly. Welcome, Afshin. Can you share with us your journey as a disability justice advocate and why you felt compelled to share your story?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here with all of you guys and to be able to kind of share my story and where I'm coming from and my hopes to where I want to be in the future with my advocacy. I kind of started out with just advocating for myself with medical professionals. I have seronegative rheumatoid arthritis, which means my lab work shows perfect results every single time, but my body is less than perfect. I go through a lot of joint swelling and things like that. So naturally, I kept going to doctors and fighting for a diagnosis. And it took about 10 years to get a diagnosis. So within those 10 years, I just picked up a lot of skills to kind of support myself through my journey. One thing I learned throughout those 10 years is if I wasn't going to advocate for myself, nobody else was. Because my parents are very good people, but they're also not very good at advocating for themselves. They weren't taught that skill when they were younger, so it's something that wasn't really passed down to me. And I wanted to make it easier for people to learn how to advocate for themselves. We grew up in such communities where individualistic ideas is just not appropriate and it's not accepted. And when I started talking about my disease on social media, my family was just like, well, I guess we have to deal with it because she's going to do it regardless. And it wasn't until they started hearing from me how I'm making friends, how I'm actually connecting with other Desi women, which I hadn't been able to do living in a majority of the Caucasian area. So it's just been such a great opportunity for me to connect with my peers. I have a ton of people that I've been able to connect with just having illnesses and even getting some answers for myself. Like I had no idea that fibromyalgia was a thing because none of my doctors had brought it up to me until one of my friends brought it up to me. And I was like, that sounds like what I go through. And then I brought it up to my doctor. Something I've learned being chronically ill in this community is you're constantly going to come across people that won't listen to what you have to say, that they will always be like, nope, I am a medical professional. I know more than you. And sometimes, of course, they've gone to college, so they know more in like the general sense. But people with disabilities, we live it. And that's why it's so important for me to speak up about it, because I was dismissed time and time again until one person, it only took one doctor, but it took 10 years to find that doctor. And I don't want anybody else to have to go through that. I want other parents to learn how to advocate for their children, just like my parents have now learned to advocate for me over the last 5 years. It's empowering for me to see all the people that have come up to me and be like, I saw your video and it made me want to talk to my doctor about this. Or I saw your video and it makes me want to get a service dog because that might be really beneficial for me. I'm still learning to get comfortable sharing all the things with, in a public light. It is scary, but I think it's so important because you never know who's reading it. You never know who's going to come across your post and know that, wow, I'm not the only one, and feel that validation that I craved for such a long time. So it's honestly just a blessing for me. And I personally do it for my own gain, but if it's helping anybody else, it's more than my honor to do so.
Afshin, it sounds like it's also a blessing for a lot of other people who are watching your videos and they're really learning from them. You talked about having a service dog. We know you have a companion, Sammy. Do you want to talk a little bit about Sammy and what difference Sammy has made in your life?
Yeah, I would love to. So Sammy is my service animal. She's my mobility dog as well as my psychiatric support dog. So she has tasks that help me with my rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia, like when I drop things on the ground, because sometimes you just have spasms you can't control. So she'll pick things up for me because of my other illnesses. I have low blood pressure and anemia, so I have fainting spells. She also mitigates them by giving me about a 4-minute notice so I can go sit down and find a place to be safe, so I'm not falling all over the place. She goes to work with me so she can really support me throughout the day and enable me to work full time. I was at a point where I couldn't get out of bed because it was just unsafe for me to be walking around on my own. And Sammy's made it so I could live on my own. I could go back to grad school so I can continue my passion of being a therapist and being a professional and helping in mental health. So she's been a game changer. And if you feel like you need a mobility aid or a service dog or anything that's going to make your life easier as a disabled person, 100% do it. And there's so many resources out there now that you can pretty much have your own way of training your own service dog. And there's so many protections that are in place by ADA that a lot of people aren't educated about, but that's why we have a really wonderful community, both on Instagram and TikTok and otherwise, and they're all working towards the same goal of visibility.
Thank you. And you're here spreading that word and keep doing that great work, and hope to one day meet you in person, meet Sammy in person. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. You're so inspiring.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, I'm going to introduce Healthcare Executives Operations Director, podcast host and trainer, and TEDx speaker, Jenny Rath, who launched the podcast series, What's on Your Mind in 2020 as a platform for people from around the world to share their stories. Welcome, Jenny. Now, you have spoken about your experiences with a learning disability and how your late diagnosis was tied up in cultural expectations and impacted your mental health as a child. Can you share with us your journey and why you were moved to share your story, especially as a way to empower others in the community to come forward and share their stories?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I speak about my story because honestly, it's a weird one. And I feel like it's a story that's not heard a lot, especially by a lot of South Asian people, especially South Indian people. I'll start off by saying that I grew up as a kid who loved school for all the wrong reasons, because I loved school because of the validation and appreciation I got because I was a teacher's pet. I loved getting straight A's. I loved coming home and showing my parents straight A's so that they would be proud of me. And then I would be living up to, my older sister who's 8 years older than me. And she's a smart, intelligent woman, and I wanted to be just like her. I wanted to do math. I wanted to do science. I wanted to do all of these things. And I loved school up until when I didn't love it anymore. And then at that point, no one believed me because I had spent so much of my time proving to everyone how much I loved performing in school, to the point where when I wasn't really performing up to anyone's standards or even my own at that point, it was too late for me to explain why I was having so much difficulty. So backtracking a little bit, I was very good at math. I was really good at science, and I was a musically inclined kid. I liked reading up until when I couldn't read anymore. There was a point where I was, in they called it talented and gifted program. And I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so standardized testing started in our state very, very early. And my earliest memory where I realized something might be wrong was when I was in the 5th grade and we had to take what were called the TCAPs. It was a standardized test. and I tested as if English was my second language. And when they asked me what happened, I remember explaining to the teacher, I couldn't understand the test. And no one knew what I meant. I couldn't even verbalize what was going on because it was the first time that I'd ever been in a situation where I was reading words. I was reading the words on the paper and I knew what each individual word was saying, but putting together in the sentence, I would read the sentence and within a millisecond, I couldn't even understand. It was like the sentence had no meaning. Because I had a relationship with the school, because I had already been a talented and gifted kid, I'm doing air quotes because all that stuff is honestly meaningless now. I was considered a talented and gifted student. And so I was very privileged that I got a pass on that. They let me continue on to the talented and gifted program because they had a meeting with my parents and they said, well, none of her other grades are showing like this. Clearly, maybe something was wrong with the test. And so they let me continue on this trajectory, on an academic rigorous trajectory for the rest of my life. Now, I often look back and think if I was not a South Indian girl, I would not have been given that chance. That's something that I very much acknowledge. But lo and behold, I got put on that path. And I remember thinking to myself, even in 5th grade, I don't think the test was wrong. I just didn't understand the test. And I don't know why no one is believing me. At this point, I'm, in Kumon classes, I'm doing 11th grade math in age 6th grade. So again, there was no indication that I had a learning disability. Fast forward, there's more and more tests coming. I think I started preparing for my SATs starting in the 7th grade. I'm still bringing home the straight A's, but I'm realizing that I am starting to get very, very, very stressed out. Anytime that there was a test, anytime that there was a time expectation for performing, or anytime that I was under the expectation that I had to read something with the ask that I have to understand it, interpret it, and tell somebody what something means. I started to develop panic attacks really early in middle school. And again, I didn't have the language to explain what was happening. It was in our household, don't be stressed. You have to figure out how to manage through stress. Let's put you in Kumon for reading comprehension. So I started the reading comprehension and my math scores were going up and nothing was happening to the reading scores. Fast forward to high school, it's, the SATs that I've now been preparing for the past 4 years are finally here. And I failed the SATs 3 times. I have panic attacks during the exams. And basically at this point, I'm struggling with mental health issues, depression, anxiety, because all of that stuff that made school so fun for me when I was a kid, I'm no longer getting that validation. I'm seeing my peers, people that I've been growing up with, succeed and get flying stars on their SATs, getting into their dream schools. And I'm starting to panic that something is wrong with me and that I have now started to associate my value with all of this external validation. And now I'm not getting the A's and I'm not getting the grades. And now I'm starting to think I am an idiot. So again, we have no idea what's going on with me. It's basically what's being told is that I panic and that I'm not able to manage stress when I'm taking a standardized test. At this time, the movie Tare Zameen Par actually comes out, and it's one of my family's favorite movies, and it features a little boy that is dealing with dyslexia. And I remember watching that movie, feeling really close to this character, but again, not really recognizing that those were the symptoms that I was experiencing, because dyslexia, as I've learned now, presents differently in different people. At this time, I'm also now starting to prepare for college exams or getting into college, because the SATs I know are not going to get me into college. So I start making sure that I'm volunteering. I'm doing all of these other activities. I start volunteering for a group called Reading for the Blind and Dyslexic. I'm recording books on tape, reading kid level books, doing voices and character work, and volunteering for an organization that supports kids with learning disabilities. Again, having no idea that I am one of these kids. finally it gets to college. I somehow get into my dream school, UNC Chapel Hill. They were astute enough to realize that maybe SATs aren't the best marker of intelligence. And so there were other ways that they allowed kids to prove themselves to get into college. So I got into my dream school. And I struggled so hard through college. I was not able to get those A's. Studying looked different. Everything was just, here's a textbook to go read it. And it was hard. I was a pre-med student starting my first day, and I never understood why I was doing it. I was good at the science and the math, but the rigor really got to me. I was in a program with predominantly other South Asians, and it was that comparison feeling all over again, seeing my peers excel and then having to talk about it and in front of everyone when everyone just wants to talk about their academics and what they're doing, and me not wanting to be involved, me not wanting to talk about school or my grades or why tests were hard for me. I somehow made it through school, but I dropped the pre-med and found another path for me. I realized I really decided to go into the public health world, into the environmental engineering. I really decided to lean on the math side and my love for people. And I realized there's a different way that I can be in health, and I don't need to be a doctor because, this is not going to align with my mental health. Between college and grad school, I took a gap year, which was very taboo because I decided not to go to med school. I had to kind of refigure what I'm going to do with my life. And so I took the year and I worked in public health education. I worked as an actor. I did educational theater. And then I started to volunteer and work with our student health center. Part of my job was to advocate for other students and teach them about different services on campus. And one of them was the Learning Center. I went to the Learning Center to meet with the director, and I asked them, tell me about your organization and how I can pitch you to students. And there was a pamphlet in the director's office that said, do you read a sentence and forget what it means? You might have dyslexia. And I took the pamphlet and I was like, we might need to change the purpose of this meeting because I think I might have dyslexia. Now, at this point, I am past 21 years old of age. Fast forward, we end up having a lot of meetings, and turns out that I'm dyslexic. Again, it presents differently in different people. And I share this to say, because in grad school, when I finally had this diagnosis to my name, I was able to get help. I was able to get alternate testing conditions to where I didn't have panic attacks anymore on tests. They changed long text into short questions where instead of it being multiple choice, where I didn't have to read letters, that I could just write my response. And now I'm at age 30, feeling much better about myself because I've learned to also sever that tie between external validation and grades and getting check marks, into just feeling that me, myself as a human, have intrinsic value just existing. I don't need the grades. And I went from somebody who, couldn't do any reading comprehension to now being a writer myself and leading a team of people that now everyone does math for a living, but because I have this extra sense of compassion, I've become a good people leader, and I've become so passionate about sharing your stories. I think it's so imperative for people to live their own stories and not live stories written for them by other people. And so that's one of the reasons why I started my podcast, because I truly believe that we are people beyond our job titles. We're people beyond our credentials. We're people beyond the grades that we make and the SAT scores. We're human beings with amazing perspectives and lived experiences. And that's what I want to get out into the world. So that's what I do.
Jenny, I'm so moved by your story. I'm sure everybody else listening is as well. There are a lot of things in the chat. People resonate, people understand. And yet, there's some uniqueness to these experiences as well. Makes me feel like there are no boundaries to your gifts and your talents and what you're going to be, what you've already achieved and what you really will be achieving as well. So really, really thank you for being here. And thank you for sharing your story. I'm going to now introduce our last two panelists, and they're a duo, so I'm going to introduce them together. These are two amazing young women, both of whom recently graduated from University of Southern California. who share a passion for disability justice and who co-founded WOSAP Collegiate, a global network of collegiate disability right advocates, Manushri Desai and Anusha Singh. Welcome, Manushri and Anusha. Let me ask this question to each of you together. And Manushri, I'll begin with you. How does your advocacy for disability justice intersect with your South Asian identity?
Thank you so much for the question. And I want to start off by saying it's been such an honor to hear from the fellow panelists, because I resonate a lot with the intersection between their identities and the disability justice movement. My journey with the disability justice movement started in 2018 when I was visiting the Blind People's Association in Gujarat, India, on a summer trip to actually visit my grandparents. And I happened to stumble upon this rather close-knit community. When I walked into this space, it was, surrounded by tall ironclad gates, but then inside there was a primary and secondary school for children with disabilities, and to the left there was a workspace where people with disabilities worked as everything from yoga instructors to physical therapists, and I really saw the dichotomy in India when I entered this space, the Blind People's Association, because although it was rather physically closed off, the community inside, the people with disabilities, thrived off of this unfathomable energy of solidarity. And this was my first introduction to the disability justice movement. And I began to realize when I visited in 2018, the way that many people perceived disability in India reflected the recency of their disability rights movement, which was, as recent as 2016. Many people with disabilities were still considered to be, inconvenient to the person and their family, and ability was commonly construed to be the opposite and something desirable. And that resulted in kind of the closed off nature of these resources for people with disabilities that were rather separated and segmented from society. And that was a kind of a jarring introduction to the disability movement. And it also hit pretty close to home, because I realized that it was very intricately tied to my own cultural identity. And that was kind of the moment that I started to think about how I can reconcile my cultural identity with my mission to still, empower persons with disabilities. And when I was visiting the BPA, this actualized in a very unique and coincidental way. At the time, I was talking to the executive director of the BPA. His name was Mr. Bhushan Punani. And at the time, I was very interested in pursuing medicine. And so when I brought up my interest, he mentioned that there was a 17-year-old petitioner whose name was Perswani Asutosh. He was an individual with low vision impairment who had all the proper qualifications for medical school, but he was being denied access to medical education simply because of his low visual impairment. When I met Mr. Punani, the executive director, he mentioned that there were only 48 hours before the final Supreme Court hearing for this individual, Perswani Asutosh, yet the team that was preparing the case lacked sort of an international perspective and precedent about how students with low visual impairment had been granted access to medical education. So one of my colleagues and I, in those 48 hours, prepared a policy brief which outlined some of these international precedents and pleaded with the Supreme Court of India to grant this student access to simply the things he needed, his education, to pursue the type of life that he wanted to live. And so we submitted our policy brief, and 2 months later, we found out that our case had actually been read in court by a lawyer in the Supreme Court of India, Prasant Bhushan, and it helped procure the greatest change for visually impaired minors in Indian legislative history. And Perswani Asutosh was the first minor to matriculate onto medical school with low visual impairment. So that was an incredible, self-satisfying success point. But more importantly, it really reminded me of kind of, I always had felt like I was on both sides of the Desi American hyphen, especially being born and raised here. And I started to understand that I was constantly traversing these different worlds. As a disability justice advocate who is a South Asian, I had more power in my voice when I was in disability related spaces, but oftentimes my voice was quieter when I was advocating for disability justice amongst my family and friends. And so it became really important to me to recognize that people who look like me and who are disability justice advocates need a space in our world. And it's becoming more evident now that there's an importance to our voices, especially as youth, because there's a lot of untapped potential and a long way to go when it comes to achieving disability justice that we can help out with. So yeah, that's kind of how my journey began, and why I feel so passionately about the intersection between my South Asian identity and the disability justice movement.
Thanks, Manushree. Anusha, how about you?
Absolutely. I might have heard Manushree share this story at least 100 times, but every time it's still so inspiring to hear her speak about everything she's done. But yeah, similar but also a bit different from her story. My journey also began in India, but rather than visiting my grandparents, I was actually living in India at the time. I'm kind of a global citizen. I've actually moved around quite a bit. And so during my brief stint in India, I did a lot of just nonprofit work. It just kind of stemmed from something my family's come on doing and something that I just naturally did. And a lot of the work I was inclined to do was particularly in the area of disabilities, but with children. And so I was oftentimes in the community, interacting with kids, interacting in a way that's not always vocal, but rather through gestures and expressions and playing games and whatnot. And I was always drawn to these kids. And I knew that in some way or another, I was going to come back and help in a way that I felt was more tangible rather than spending an hour a week and calling it a week. And so it was one organization I particularly worked with called Giftable. And this organization might have been 20 people working out of the smallest garage you can imagine. But the work they were doing was incredible. Their goal was to sort of introduce education for visually impaired children through tactile being touch. And so she actually walked me through the production of how she creates her materials and books and whatnot. And I kind of just walked away from that thinking, that's pretty cool. That's awesome. But coincidentally, that same summer, I was coming to the States for an internship. And I decided to take things, and this was like a corporate internship, completely different from anything disability related. But outside of my work hours, I decided to take it a step further and research what is it that the US has to offer in terms of tactile and helping visually impaired children specifically educate themselves. And that's where I learned the technology here, of course, while it's far more ahead, uses a lot of the same basic premises they were using back in India. Of course, there is audiobooks. That technology could not yet be implemented in India, but their tactile books and education material was far ahead. So inspired by what I saw here, when I went back to finish high school in India, I created my own organization called Build a Vision. And the basic premise was to create tactile books, board games, any sort of education material I could to go distribute to these kids in these rural communities. And in doing so, I was doing a lot of fundraising, and a lot of my funds went back to Giftable to help them buy a Braille typewriter, just to make things a lot more easier. Because when I was doing all my Braille, I was doing it by hand, and I actually still have bruises from when I used to do it by hand, because it was like so many books in each and every single page. I was, doing storybooks or like maps or whatever it may be. And it was like manually doing it. Cause again, like I said, where I was, there wasn't that technology to automate everything. So a lot of my fundraising went towards sort of the automation process. And I knew that leaving India, I did not want this just to be a me thing, but rather something that continues beyond me. And so I went to my high school and tried to implement things there. We went out and did a whole advocacy project at my high school so that kids continue to this day taking on the same projects and similar ideas. And so I, like I said earlier, was a little bit more hands-on. And so I kind of knew that the disability area, while I myself am an abled body, and so are a lot of my friends and my peers, my family, I've always had this connection to this community because I've just interacted with them. And something that I think where the change needs to also begin is in the lingo, the language that surrounds disability. I've heard a lot of normal people versus disabled people. I don't know what defines anyone as normal, but again, this is all language that we need to start to build. We need to start to just the way we talk, even though it may seem harmless amongst able-bodied individuals, it is harming the disabled community in ways that we can't imagine. Something that the founder of Gift Abled parted with me when I left India, she said that we all are just TAPs, temporarily abled persons, and that disability can happen to anyone at any time. So it's very important to be cognizant of that and always remind yourself that they're a community just like everyone else. And so it's very important that we include them in our day-to-day. And I think Rachna said this earlier, but what makes disability harder is that the world around us is putting so much emphasis on them being othered. And if they were just a normal part of society, if infrastructure was built in a way where it wasn't a building was built first and then a ramp was added, but rather the ramp was there from the beginning to begin with, there would be no differences. And so this is the sort of thing, and I think Manish and I will get into this a little bit later on how we kind of met and continued our journey, but this is the sort of founding premise of what brought both of us into the disability advocacy area.
Thanks so much, Anusha, Manushi. We have so many more questions for you. Just we could spend a lot of time. We're getting close towards the end of the program, so we want to make sure we keep this conversation going. You all have accomplished so much at such a young age, so inspiring. I think the United States Supreme Court needs to take note of the work that you all are doing, and the lawyers and the judges need to take that note as well. And as well as philanthropy, nonprofits. Anusha, to your point about thinking of diversity in a way that includes all of the things we are talking about here, so that we are able to get to an equitable place, and we cannot get there if we don't have inclusion. So thank you to both of you. I know we're going to hear more about you, of you, and from you. So looking forward to that. And with that, we are really coming towards the end of the program. Really thanking all of the participants, all the panelists, for just such an inspiring panel. We've learned so much. I myself feel so much exposed to so much more information than I had before, and really had a sense of community. I felt that a lot of these stories had their own uniqueness, but also had a lot of commonality, and just built on top of each other. They were so connected, and all of them was there. So thank you for your tremendous leadership. And as we conclude, just a reminder that there's progress that has been made. There are things that were not there in the 20th century that are here in the 21st century, things that were not there in the first decade of this century that are now here, but that there's still so much more to be done. And this cannot be something that we can do in one day, in 1 month, but really has to be carried throughout the year and has to be part of who we are, and not just who we are, our entire community. And the work really could be something that the South Asian community takes on as a place of responsibility, to push back against the stigma, against the bias and the misconceptions, against those with varying abilities. I am proud to be part of this organization that centers narratives that are not often told or celebrated in our communities. And I would request everyone to join us, be part of this movement, be part of this coalition, join our mailing list to know what else we are doing, and really please be connected and be engaged with us. And with that, thank you very much. Have a great evening, everyone.
Record